Brick Lane is a place that for hundreds of years has been the first port of call for different waves of immigrant groups who've arrived in England. So it has a very fascinating history, which is in a constant state of flux, and from the 1980s onwards has gone through this period of regeneration. We are standing in Sandy's Row Synagogue. It's one of those buildings that reflects the different waves of immigrants who've lived here. It's still a functioning synagogue, you know, in the heart of this kind of bustling tourist zone, and I'm very passionate about making sure that it retains its function. My name is Rachel Lichtenstein. I'm an artist and a writer, the author of On Brick Lane, and one of my other roles is working here as a social historian and archivist recording the history of Jewish London. Well, Brick Lane has always been a great point of interest to me because it's the place where my family lived, and I came here about 25 years ago looking for traces of the former Jewish East End, of which back then it was a lot more visible than it is today anyway. There were quite a few kind of kosher eateries and other visible signs of a Jewish past. First of all, you had French Huguenot Protestants moving here in the late 17th and 18th century, fleeing persecution and establishing a lot of the trades and the buildings, which were then reappropriated by different immigrant groups. So has turned from a very poor quarter, you know, one of the most run-down kind of rookeries in London, to being slowly regenerated and kind of rebranded as a heritage and tourist site, and has now become, you know, one of the most expensive places to live. And if you walk down Brick Lane now, it's unrecognisable from the Brick Lane that I arrived to 25 years ago.
Just a 1-minute ride to Liverpool Street Station, and here it is, the Bangladesh cum Pakistan quarter of London, right here in London's East End. The colony has changed hands 3 times in the last century. The Jews preceded these, the Asians, and in turn the Jews took over from the poverty-stricken Cockneys of the Victorian age.
Well, this is a historical building, the Bricklin Mosque now. This mosque has been converted from synagogue to mosque in 1976. And before synagogue, it was Huguenot. We see this mosque as not only a mosque, but as a community center. The East End has got the history of immigrant coming in. I came in Brick Lane when I was about 15, 16. In late 80s, we beginning to bring our children, bring our families here. Now we have the children who have been born and brought up in this country, and some are already quite successful in their profession. You know, more and more people are moving out of the area than it was in late 70s and early 80s. We had quite a problem with some racist attacks and things like that. In 70s, there was a skinhead and other right-wingers, you know, who protested and who, you know, who attacked our community in and around the Brick Lane. So we gathered here as a center as well as a mosque. But it has been changed now. We don't have this sort of feeling. People are free to walk, free to go and pray. And the element of the racism is no longer in and around here. But I know there is racism is in existence, you know, in some form, but not as it was in 70s and early 80s and things like that.
It's important to remember that the Bangladeshi community there were quite particularly during the 70s and 80s, very economically deprived. They encountered all sorts of all forms of racism, institutional racism, street level violence. You had the NF, which was very National Front, which was very active at the time. I don't know if you guys went to Al Tabali Park, which is just off Whitechapel Road, just at the top of Brick Lane. Al Tabali was a guy who was actually killed in 1978, I think he was, by NF racists. He was murdered, he was stabbed to death. And so that park was renamed in his honour. There's a monument in the corner, which is a replica of a monument in Bangladesh. So again, this is the politics of space, of community, of consolidating one's presence in Britain as a diaspora, as a migrant ethnic community, in the same way as building a synagogue or building a mosque would be. But what I find very interesting is that the people who live around Brick Lane of Bangladeshi origin are still very much quote-unquote working class, right? They're still having to wrangle with all sorts of social and economic marginalisation, still trying to be mobile. And so for them, people coming in, selling their properties onto those people for inflated prices is a good thing, is a boon, because that means that they can get out of that area and buy a bigger house in Essex, buy a bigger house in North London or wherever else they decide to fly. So gentrification is a contested issue, I think. I mean, I can't speak for other areas, but certainly here there is generally an appetite to have more people coming in.
We used to have a large number of people attending the congregation, but now it's almost half. So people are going out of the area. Lots of Bangladeshi community are going out of the area, but still, this mosque still remains one of the largest and one of the oldest mosque. And people, even though people are moving out of the area, they do come for Friday prayer here. They gather here for that. So at least they have some sort of link with this mosque. And the business people in Brick Lane, as I said, it's going, everything going up. So it's very difficult for them to survive, to carry on business. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it might not last very much.
People who grow up in these areas do not romanticize it, do not glorify it. They want to get out, right? They don't want to live in squalor, right? They don't want to live in places that, especially when they've got Canary Wharf on one side, so visible, and then you've got the City of London on the other side, right? There's so much money that encapsulates Tower Hamlets. They're aware of what could be, right? So there is an aspirational quality among certainly the young Bangladeshis that I come across, who want to move out of it. They want to do better for their family. They want to get their parents out, right? They don't want them to live in these small flats anymore. They want to live in a big detached house somewhere in the suburbs.
It's a very, very commercial tourist zone now. Most of the market that I describe in the book has just dwindled away to nothing. Now it's disappeared, and many younger people in the Bangladeshi community have moved out or are moving out of the area because there's no new social housing being built and they cannot afford to live here. So a huge amount of local people have been priced out of the area.
There was an anti-gentrification movement came down here 3 years ago, and funny enough, they bypassed the box park where there was expensive watches on sale, blah blah blah. They aimed their attention at a shop down the road called the Cereal Killers, and it is they sell cereals from across the world. Well, why would you? Well, fair play. I don't know. But that shop got attacked for selling cereals from around the world.
I think people are right to be concerned of others, wealthier others, and in this case of a particular ethnic makeup. So basically white wealthy people coming into Shoreditch and the surrounding areas because it's trendy and it's an art scene and it's sort of somewhere where it's cool or hip to be living and telling other people that you live there. I think there's a conflation between how we perceive that as people coming in and then bullying people out of their communities. I think that's problematic, but in this particular case, that doesn't seem to be happening in such a stark way. right? So it isn't a case of sort of all these rich white people coming in and pushing out the Bangladeshis. It's not work. It doesn't work like that. What's happening is people coming in, they're buying council properties, they're buying properties, they're inflating prices there, but a lot of the people who are living in these areas own properties, right? So the right to buy scheme in the 80s and 90s, a lot of Bangladeshi people took advantage of that.
Pret a Manger on the top of Brick Lane got a bit of slating a couple of years ago. When they first started up, everyone went, well, we don't want Pret a Manger, but Pret a Manger, they give all their food away of night time. You know, I can walk in there, get a free coffee. If I'm charming, I can get a free coffee. No, it's cool. So, I don't know.
And people have sold up, moved out of the area. And that's all part of the kind of constant change that happens in cities. But I have some sadness about it, there's some loss.
Because if we had policies where we say, all right, well, these are communities, we want to keep communities here, we're going to have some way of making sure that the children of migrants have an opportunity to buy a home near their parents, then maybe gentrification wouldn't be so accelerated as we see now, right? Because it seems to be taking off. Last 10 years, 15 years, it's really occurring at a rapid speed. But they don't have that regulation. They don't have that regulation because it doesn't make business sense to have that kind of regulation, right? Why would you give up prime real estate right next to the City of London for the sake of some lefty policy where it keeps, you know, communities and families together? Why would you want to do that? Stop that. That doesn't make any sense. Make some cash.